Hello, and welcome to Why Do We Do That? A psychology podcast that deconstructs human behavior from the perspectives of social scientists, psychologists, and others that use applied psychology in their work. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Moyer. In this episode, I sat down with sociologist Corey Keyes to discuss his work on languishing. Corey is a professor emeritus of sociology at Emory University, where he held the Winship Distinguished Research Professorship. A pioneer in the field of positive psychology, his research most notably introduced the concepts of social well-being, flourishing, and languishing. His newest book is called Languishing: How to Feel Alive Again in a World That Wears Us Down, and was the topic of our conversation. One key takeaway from my conversation with Corey was that our cultural focus on depression and anxiety often overshadows the quieter, more elusive state of languishing. While sadness reflects the presence of negative emotion, languishing is marked by the absence of emotion, an inner emptiness or numbness that dulls both joy and pain. A person may appear to have everything in place: a loving family, a stable career, a few hobbies, and an ample number of friends, yet still feel disconnected, unfulfilled, or adrift. This state doesn't stem from a lack of basic needs or pleasant experiences, but rather from an absence of deeper meaning and purpose. True well-being seems to depend less on momentary pleasure and more on the cultivation of enduring fulfillment through meaningful relationships, a sense of purpose larger than oneself, and the ongoing pursuit of personal growth. Temporary mood boosters like entertainment or substances may offer some relief, but they cannot replace the lasting satisfaction that comes from living intentionally. I also appreciated Corey's nuanced perspective on social connection and well-being. While common advice often encourages people to just be more social, Corey highlights an important truth. For many, the deepest sources of pain are rooted in relationships. Before we can build healthy, trusting connections with others, some of us must first revisit and heal from early relational wounds. That process of unlearning old patterns and rebuilding trust takes time and courage, but it often lays the foundation for the kind of meaningful relationships that sustain real happiness. If you've ever gone through your daily routine and ended the day with a quiet sense of dissatisfaction, this conversation may offer insight into what's missing and how to move from simply functioning to truly flourishing. Enjoy. All right, today I am joined by Corey Keyes. Thank you so much for being on today.
It's great to be with you, Ryan.
Corey has a book called Languishing: How to Feel Alive Again in a World That Wears Us Down. So we're going to be talking about human well-being today. If you're interested, in episode 57, I speak with Clay Rutledge about the topic of human well-being, but I think that the topic is so broad that we are likely to avoid any major overlap. I think it's a nice complement to what we're going to be talking about today, which is languishing. So languishing is this negative state of being that you talk about in your book, and it seems as though you're kind of trying to change the focus of human well-being from this idea of like depression, mental illness, and towards something more subtle that needs to be addressed. So what is languishing, and how is it different from what we classically think of as the negative human experience, the depression, anxiety, etc.?
Yes, and you're correct, Ryan. I'm really trying to change some of the direction if you will, in the way we're trying to tackle a problem that's near and dear to me, mental illness, but also by also adding a new way to think and approach it, which is by focusing on well-being. So languishing is the absence of good mental health. Another way to think about it is when people are languishing, they are mentally unhealthy. And think of it this way, when people are engaging in physically unhealthy behaviors, they're bad in and of themselves. They don't sleep enough. They might be drinking too much alcohol. Their diet might be lacking basic nutrition
Right.
and so forth. In and of itself, physically unhealthy habits lead to a sort of negative, undesirable state. But if you stay there too long and you do much of that, you end up with a physical illness. Now, languishing is the same thing. In and of itself, it's a place of being mentally unhealthy, and it's bad in and of itself. But if you stay there too long, it too can lead to an illness, in this case, mental illness. So
Hmm.
I'm trying to get people to move upstream in a different way by focusing on languishing long before we become mentally ill, because languishing is an undesirable place to be.
Could you tell us an example or a story that illustrates languishing? I found that that was the most helpful part for me as I was going through your book is the human faces of languishing. I found
Mm,
it was very easy to relate to the idea once you put it into a real world context.
yeah. I used a couple examples. One woman I was sitting next to at a park bench, and she was watching her child play, and she's got talking, and she asked me what I was up to, and I was writing a book, and of course she asked me, "What about?" And I said, "Languishing," and he said, "Oh my God, that word speaks to me." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she described a place in where she has been. And it was definitely languishing. And she started out by describing it. It's like being on an airplane, but you can't land. You're circling around the runway because you're not allowed to land. You don't feel in control. You don't have a sense of what any control of over your destiny. You feel stuck,
Mhm.
stagnant,
And you're not in
and
danger. Well, that's what's I always
no.
like that. You're not in danger. It's not this heightened arousal kind of frustration. It's more of, like you said, a lack of control.
Yeah, it does start to bleed into potentially dangerous territory when people start to use the language that shocked me, which was they start to feel like they are dying inside. Now,
Hmm.
many people, when I was interviewing them, use that expression. I feel dead inside, or numb, empty, or like I'm dying. And that really got me thinking that it if you stay there too long, these were people who had been languishing for a while. It becomes a bad place to be in. And the way I think about it this way is it's sort of like fog. You don't see it happening around you. It's just so gentle, quiet, and slow, and it begins to engulf you.
Yeah.
Without you even noticing it, suddenly you can barely see 10 feet in front of you. You're
Hmm.
engulfed by it. And that's a way I think of languishing. No, most often than not, you don't feel like you're in danger. But if you stay there too long, you begin to think life isn't worth living. And that's when things get serious.
So could you put these this negative experience into context? And what I mean by that is, and we're going to talk about some solutions to languishing, but before we get into that, how should we think about the negative state of being associated with languishing? Because, you could approach this problem a couple different ways. You could look at negative emotions like languishing, and you could say we need to avoid them. We need to put things into our lives so that we minimize the amount of time that we feel like we're languishing. But
you could also take a different approach. You could say that, languishing is something we need to learn to live with and we need to
Mm.
manage it, kind of akin to stress. Stress is not something that can be avoided, it's something that we
Mhm.
need to manage. Um, Dr. Drew Pinsky used to talk about this idea of everyday misery, he would call it,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
how we need to just be okay with being miserable every now and then. How would you contextualize languishing? How should we approach it as a problem?
Well, first, I, I would hesitate to associate any emotion with languishing because usually it is the absence of feeling anything good or bad. A lot of people talk about it as feeling numb. So the second thing is you can no more avoid languishing than you can avoid sadness in life. Now, sadness is one of those basic emotions that has a function. It's very important. It's there because evolution favored it, and it serves its purpose. Because when we've lost something very meaningful to us, not only do we feel grief, we end up feeling sad, and it usually encourages us to step back and think and reflect on lessons in life from loss. But sadness can move from a normal, useful emotion to a dysfunctional and abnormal emotion if it persists too long and for too strong. I like to say too long, too strong.
Mhm.
Right? The way psychiatrists and clinical psychologists differentiate it, normal emotions such as like anxiety and sadness to suddenly becoming abnormal or dysfunctional when becoming mental illnesses. Languishing is also a very useful state. I like to think of it, and I've described it elsewhere as it's a wake up call. It's like an existential alarm clock going off in the same way that the night before you set your alarm clock with the best of intentions that when went off, you were going to get up and go take a walk for 20 minutes and exercise. You know what happens for many of us? We hit snooze and we fall back asleep and we ignore the actual alarm clock. Now, that's when languishing becomes dysfunctional, when we keep ignoring its call, which is asking us to pay attention to the fact that we have let go of some very good things that used to bring our life the ingredients of flourishing. Like I used to have a purpose or a meaning and a direction in life. I suddenly feel directionless, like my purpose is gone. I used to feel like I was being challenged to grow and become a better person. Now nothing is challenging me. I feel like life has just become flat. And so it's a wake up call that something good has gone missing in your life, and you're supposed to step back and say, what have I done? What have I changed in my life that lets go the ingredients of my well being? Because languishing is the loss of well being. It's there to suddenly say, wait a minute, don't let this become a habit. So if you keep hitting snooze on the existential alarm clock of languishing, guess what? It's going to become dysfunctional and you will start to feel like you're dying inside. And that's the way a lot of people have talked about it because you've let go of a life that used to sustain your well-being.
Mhm. So, human beings spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to feel good,
Mm.
how to live a fulfilling life. And it strikes me that a lot of the default ways that we try to make ourselves feel better, try to aim our ship at something better, that we make a lot of mistakes along the way, and we misinterpret the goal, with the fundamental goal. Um, what are some things that people misunderstand about what it takes to live a fulfilling life?
Yeah. I, I think the first is this, that we are just surrounded by this happiness industry.
Yeah.
And I'm so sick of hearing about the happiness report that comes out once a year, and we rank the countries according to the happiest and the unhappiest, as if happiness is the end all and be all of life. It sure does sell a lot of books, and it gets a lot of attention, and a lot of companies that measure it, they get their little blip and attention, and then we go on. But I think we're surrounded by this world that just wants us to think that happiness is just one meditation or one book away from our reach. And I think what we miss is that we think we are chasing happiness without realizing it was designed to be fleeting.
Mhm.
And I can't tell you, I write about this in my book. When I was teaching my happiness seminar, my students are really bright little, wonderful, brilliant people. They would come to my university hungry for knowledge and knowing and feeling quite wise. And then I would set them up. I would say, oh, well, okay, your first task, your first take-home exercise this week in happiness is to go out there and create a feeling of happiness and try to sustain it for as long as possible. And come back, write it. I want you to write an essay. I give them prompts and some readings, um, and and they walk out of there thinking this is going to be the easiest class ever because that's the first week, right? And they come back and they all fail. They could barely keep happiness going for an hour. And then what they realized is they felt futile at the end of the day, like exhausted. Like, why was I chasing this thing that's only there to be time limited? And then we have a wonderful conversation because it's an emotion. And emotion is not designed to persist. It's there like the flag in the windsock on a runway. It's there to blow with whatever direction the wind is going and telling us what to do for that moment, how to adjust our life that moment, and then let it go. You have adjusted your life, and now guess what? You look back at that windsock, it's probably changed 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Same thing. We keep chasing. We fall for it. It's as if we're like greyhound chasing that illusory rabbit around the track again and again, as if we're going to catch it. We're not. So this is the lesson I took from Aristotle, who said, "Don't put happiness first. Don't put pleasure first. Put excellence or human excellence first. Try to develop yourself along lines of excellence to become a better human being." And you will suddenly start to feel happy about something worth having and feeling happy about that
Mhm.
can't be easily taken from you, like integrity, honesty, character, all those good things. Those things don't disappear so quickly, and they are worthy of our feeling happy about because you worked hard to get them.
Yeah. Yeah, I tell my students something similar. I usually say the line, happiness is not something that you can go out and buy on a shelf. Because like that's this sentiment that I get, which is like I just need to find these things, this external source of happiness. This is what makes me feel better, all of these things. And so because I think, and again, I sympathize with the struggles of young people because our world places them in these situations that do not afford decision making for the long term. Like you have,
Mhm.
just to name a few, you have a tablet that gives you instant entertainment. You have food for the most part readily available. Gaming. I'm not one to criticize gaming too much, but as you said, like it's all about the dosage. How much of it? How often are you
Mhm.
engaging in this to make yourself feel better? Um, could you talk about this environment, the environment that people are in that might that might interfere with our ability to focus on long-term happiness or sustainable
Yeah.
happiness, as I might call it.
Well, I love the way Anna Lemke talked about it when in Dopamine Nation that we're surrounded by too much. And for many of us, not all of us. Now, there is a critique of that. I mean, there's an overabundance of external things vying for our attention and for our purchases and giving us the false promise that therein lies um, contentment, serenity, peace, pleasure, and happiness. So we live in this world where there's a whole group of people who have too much and an overabundance, and then there's a whole bunch of other people who have very little, and they see the other group with too much, seemingly posting a world of just joy and fun and excellence when they're really miserable. They're kind of like what the students when I was out at Stanford described as the duck syndrome, right? What they don't see is that underneath those kids with all the overabundance, you're only looking at them above the water. You're not seeing their duck feet going crazy underneath,
Right.
trying to keep up with everyone else who's portraying a life that's even better in this world of overabundance. So you've got these other kids with very little thinking therein lies the secret to everything that I should have as well, and I need to work on that too. And none of them are focusing on or getting the encouragement to focus on themselves and the things that I think Aristotle talked about, which was this way of trying to develop along lines of excellence, which was about the kind of person you are becoming, not just in terms of success, but with the kind of person that is useful for other people, a good person and a good citizen. And so I think we're just in this world that's been curated in such a way that there's the have and have-nots, and none of them are happy for various reasons. Each one of them thinking that someone else with less or more is going to have the answer.
Hmm.
And so we have all these people who are selling them some self-help books that say, well, and I struggled with my editor about this. I was not going to portray that anything as a quick fix. I'm sick of the self-help industry to say, take 5 minutes out of your life, meditate for 2 of those minutes, and you will suddenly feel better. I'm
Hmm.
like, no, we're going to have to overhaul some of these things, and we're going to have to invest in some long-term growth around ourselves and stop selling these quick fixes and as if it's all going to come from outside of ourselves. And I'll end here, Ryan.
Hmm.
We're not the first to, and we won't be the last. The father of capitalism wrote about this, Adam Smith, and he called it the Great Deception. If you can find that word in his writing on the wealth of the nation, you will find a description of what we just talked about. Back when he was writing, people were all thinking, well, my happiness lies in me having a castle on the hill in a beautiful, all the accoutrements that the wealthy have.
Hmm.
And the wealthy are thinking, nobody, I'm miserable. All I'm thinking about is I'm going to lose all this. Nobody was happy, but they were all chasing this illusory thing. So I loved what Epicurus, the great father of hedonism, said, because I think we misunderstood him. He said we need constant reminders of what really matters. Constant reminders we should not seek happiness directly, but indirectly through the things that what we really need.
Hmm.
Friends, freedom, and an examined life.
Hmm.
That's Epicurus, the father of hedonism, says what we really need is true friendships. We need true autonomy or freedom. And when things go bad, we need time to step back and reflect.
Striking this balance between feeling good and feeling purpose. It doesn't sound to me like happiness is the right term. And I know in your book you talk about a different term that is often used in the world of positive psychology called flourishing. How would you
Mhm.
describe flourishing?
Yeah. Yeah, that was the word. In some respects, I wish I hadn't used it, but I was the first to sort of come along and say, I I used that word because what I really wanted to talk about was mental health. But when you use those two words, mental health, they're very confusing to the lay public, even to scientists, because people would assume I'm talking about mental illness. And no, when I talk about mental
Mhm.
health, I'm talking about that balance, that presence of positive feelings combined with signs or symptoms. I use the medical language of symptoms of functioning well. So, flourishing was a word I used to refer to the presence of good mental health. And flourishing is about the balance of feeling good to functioning well. But here's what's interesting about flourishing. There's 14 questions on my questionnaire called the Mental Health Continuum. Only three of them are about feeling good or emotional well-being. Have you felt happy, satisfied with life, or interested in life in the past month? Now, to flourish, you only need one of those three almost every day, or every day, of course. But then there are 11 questions that get at functioning well, six of which are psychological well being, and five that are about social well being. And you need at least six out of the 11 functioning well almost every day, combined with at least one of the three feeling good. Now, I'll give you, for your audience, here are some of the social well being. How often did you feel that you belonged to a community in the past month? How often did you feel that you were contributing things of worth or value to society or your community in the past month? And third, how often were you able to make sense of what's going on in society right now, or make sense of what's going on in the world? That's called social coherence. Then psychologically, there's a sense of self-acceptance. How often did you like most parts of who you are, your personality? How often were you confident to think and express your own ideas and opinions? That's called autonomy. And how often did your life have direction and meaning, which is this purpose in life? And again, I'll repeat, you only need six out of the 11, or you can have more. You don't have to, but six out of the 11 functioning well almost every day or every day, combined with at least one of the three feeling good, which is happy, satisfied, or interested in life almost every day. Now, I'm emphasizing that because there's the balance. You have to be functioning well in slightly more ways than feeling good, but it is its own kind of balance. And flourishing doesn't mean you have to be feeling all of those things almost every day. You get to choose what you want to work on in terms of functioning well. But I always emphasize, and in my book, I made a big deal out of this. I want people to prioritize the functioning well. Put that first. Focus on a sense of personal growth. Focus on being more self accepting. Focus on being more confident to think and express your ideas and opinions. Focus on more on how you can contribute things of worth and value to society. Focus on where you can create that sense of community and belonging in your life. Put that first. And when you start to feel those things almost every day, you know what happens magically, almost by default? You start feeling better about your life. You start feeling happier, satisfied, or interested in life. I think positive emotions should be the byproduct, a result of prioritizing and becoming better at functioning well socially and psychologically in this life.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like uh, I feel like part of the challenge is with the kind of first step towards this philosophy where I mean you really have to say like I'm I'm going to have to deal with a lot of discomfort in order to have this happiness be an outcome. And I feel like
Mhm.
that's where most people trip. It's like kind of this transition period where, it's hard to embrace long-term benefits when you're used to the short-term benefits.
Yeah.
Now, you talk about you talk about these ideas in terms of vitamins, which is interesting, and you spend a good deal of time talking about growth and change. Specifically, this I like to say being effective or being competent. That you're good at
Mhm.
something. Um, and you talk a little bit about how the solution to embracing growth and change is often lies with your mindset. Just simply
Mhm.
the framework that you look at getting better at something and dealing with failure. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I, for the first time, I was able to write about some research that I rarely could talk about in the world of well-being, happiness, and positive psychology because it was about my work on self-improvement, feeling like you're becoming a better person. And it three studies, large scale studies, we focused on this, and we asked people, were they making improvements in various ways? And one study was about your role as a parent, as a partner or a spouse, your role as an employee, and so it didn't matter what we were asking about. When people felt they were making improvements in their life, they did not feel as much positive emotion as people who were staying the same. And it did not matter whether you measured their
Wow.
current level of functioning. I controlled for that, assuming that people who could afford to stay the same were somehow doing better
Right.
already. So I controlled for that. And even after controlling for the current functioning in all of those places or roles, people who were making improvement felt a more dysphoric, less satisfaction, but they saw themselves higher in terms of levels of personal growth and other facets of functioning well than people who were staying the same. Three studies showed this, that it was the paradox of growth and self improvement, which is you have to be prepared that if you're going to focus on functioning well and trying to move towards a better place, it's going to be uncomfortable because you're not going to feel good immediately. And here's the way I've described it to my students. I don't think I used this in my book. But last November, I came home with a new car, so it reminded me of this example I used for my students. Now, when you have a new car, where do you park it when you go to the grocery store? Right next to any other cars?
No, right.
No,
Yeah.
hell
Don't
no.
want it touched.
You're going to park it as far away as you have to because everyone parks as close to the door already. So they already beat you there. So where are you going to park it? As far away from any other cars. You're really, really vigilant. You think about this a lot. You do not want to scratch it. And it feels kind of, you feel a little uncomfortable. You have to really take care of this. But guess what happens? I just got my first ding 2 weeks ago because my wife and I went mountain biking and she set her mountain bike against the car, but it actually slipped and I had my first bump in it and scratch. And now I don't worry about it at all now. You know what happened? It's now my same old car.
Right.
I've had it almost a year. Now I don't think of it as brand new. I don't have to worry about it. It's got its first ding. It still looks great. I'm so much more comfortable with it. I feel really good driving it around. I don't have to worry about it anymore because I think we feel fragile when we're changing and growing into something new. I
Mhm.
think there's a fragility there and you feel like it could go away. And what has to happen, you have to stay there long enough for you to get your first ding, your first challenge. And guess what? Oh, I am much better. I'm now I'm not just a new version of me. I'm the same old me now.
Yeah, and I also think that it relates to the idea of failing and embracing failure. I
Mm.
always say, fail fast, fail frequently. Like this is like there's when you when you do fail time and time again, um, you that is where learning takes place. And for some reason, we tend to, out of fear, just avoid these outcomes. I don't really know the solution to, the switch that people need to turn off or turn on to have them embrace failure. Part of me thinks it, it might even be an outcome that individuals that have real bad consequences for failure in their childhood, they
Mm.
avoid failure a lot more than people that had more favorable experiences of failure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm sure it's very, very multifaceted in that sense. But what I remember, and I used the old study, the marshmallow study, when I was talking about this. The problem with prioritizing functioning well is nobody's come into your room and even gave you one marshmallow before you embarked on this project of self-improvement. But you got to approach it that way. There's two or three or four more waiting down the road. But here's the thing. I don't see it. I don't think I've come across any research, but I wish someone would focus on it because I've had to go through my own projects of self-improvement. And I write about that in my book. When I am devoted to making changes in my life, I'm very sensitive to setbacks. I see the slightest setback and I'm aware of it because I'm working on becoming better. There is this strange awkwardness to growth that the least little slip seems much bigger than it really is. And so what I've learned to do is surround myself with people who are engaging and have engaged in the same kind of projects so that we can talk about how they give me they do a little reality testing every so often, Ryan. They say, guess what? I felt that way too. Let's talk about that. That's an opportunity for growth and learning. Let's learn from this. And I just love being around people who have done this before me because they know exactly what I'm going through. They know that I'm magnifying the little slip. Eventually we're laughing about it, and I'm often running and feeling more compassionate and kinder to myself than I would have had I done this alone.
Yeah,
The
and
problem I
being
see human
yeah.
beings doing is they think they need to do this alone. Do not try this on your own. Surround yourself with people who have gone before you and invested in the same project of self-growth and improvement.
Which is a nice segue to talk about social connection, which you spend a lot of
Mhm.
time discussing. The interesting thing to me about discussing the importance of social connection is it strikes me as something that everyone knows. Everyone knows
Mhm.
everyone deep down knows they need friends. They need to discuss what's going on in their mind. They need to feel validated and express what's going on, what they're thinking about. If you're learning a skill, you feel seen when you talk to somebody who's been somewhere where you're going.
Yeah.
Um, but in this world that we live in, where we're more connected via devices, probably more than ever. I mean, depending on how you define connection. Um, what do we need to know? What do we need to know about social connection? What do we need to change that we're doing wrong?
Well, it sounds so simple, but I write about quality over quantity. I think I see this in the loneliness literature. And it seems to be this emphasis on frequency and quantity, as if you've lost, like they make a big deal out of, our social networks have declined by one over the last decade. And I'm like, okay, what's the message you're sending to people? Well, quantity matters. And there couldn't be anything farther from the truth, because I write about this, and Susan Carstensen pioneered this research about social emotional selectivity that happens with aging. When you're young, your social networks are much larger than when you're older. When you're young, you spend a lot more time and frequently engaging with other people than when you're older. And yet the paradox is you're not as happy when you're young as you are when you're older. And social connections and frequency are going down linearly with age. So what gives here? Well, we get more picky. We get more selective about who we spend time with and why. Our motivation changes and we're much more selective. We choose to spend time with people who bring emotionally satisfying, meaningful contact. As we get older, we prioritize really good friendships and loving relationships. We don't prioritize that as much when we're younger.
Mhm.
So it seems that we have to approach endings in life before we prioritize really satisfying social contact, which is sad. But there is one other thing about social contact that I think we would serve ourselves well if we paid more attention to. I think our greatest heartbreaks and many of our worst moments in life have come from social connection. And I write about this, having experienced my own form of trauma. Um, Many of us just assume that social contact is a great thing. No, the presence of social contact was a extremely violent, nasty thing for many of us. So, and even if you didn't experience early life trauma, or what we call, or what is called adverse childhood experiences, you will experience some of your worst moments, greatest heartbreaks, and most significant loss because of social connection. So we carry deep wounds and memory of wounds that have come from connection. And in this day and age where we are always sort of moving on and we're sort of in this sort of constant, perpetual movement, I think it takes a lot more for us to say, I'm going to reinvest in connection, because when we carry those wounds with us, I think it's hard for us to believe and trust that reconnecting with other human beings won't be another source of heartbreak. So we have to be mindful of the loss and the heartbreak that comes naturally from connection, but also that many of us carry other kinds of wounds, which is that we have experienced some of the nastiest moments at at at, at the hands and in the verbal treatment of other people.
Yeah.
So connection's a very, very complicated thing, and I think it takes work, but you have to honor the wounds that you're carrying that come from it as well.
Yeah, I that sentiment resonates with me, especially, you could probably very easily draw a line between, those of us that are a little nervous, a little bit reserved when it comes to meeting new people. It's so frequent that you can kind of trace this back to experiences in a home growing up where failure was not welcome. You can see, maybe in school, uh, you were made fun of for one thing or another, and it kind of it's sticky. Those experiences are
Mm,
sticky,
mhm,
and we really have to acknowledge that our default behaviors are formed in these years. And to be frank, if you don't change them, if you don't at least if you don't first acknowledge them that they exist, then focus on, putting yourself out there, being more vulnerable. If you don't do all of these things, you're just going to repeat that pattern, right?
Exactly. Because I mean, early attachment styles, we know that they persist throughout life. Um, Behavioral patterns that were formed to adapt to abuse and neglect in early life, we carry them with us as well. And they can get triggered in moments where we're supposed to connect and they get in the way. So I talk about my own struggles in this journey in my own book for that very reason. I put myself out there because I have had to struggle with those things and deal with them and honor them in order to move out of languishing and towards flourishing myself. Because I would have these moments, Ryan, when I'm doing great and I'm flourishing, and all of a sudden, out of I don't know where it came from, something happens and I'm triggered. And I'm like, before I know it, I'm like, wasn't even aware of how I'm reacting. And I'm like, where did that come from?
Right.
And I had to deal with trauma that happened 40 years ago because it was there when I was 60 years old. I'm like, oh my God. So you cannot look these things in your rear view. They won't stay in your rear view mirror. That I thought they would. And I thought I could out success them, and I couldn't. So
Uh,
this is a point I don't think all these people who talk about loneliness have any sense about, that many people are carrying deep wounds around social connection. And all you're telling them to do is just walk into the arms of strangers and make friends. I'm like, no way. No, thank you.
to wrap up, let's talk about meaning. Meaning is this idea that we need we need something that is beyond us. We need purpose. We need to matter, as you talk about in the book.
Mhm.
And meaning, it could be something completely different for one person or another. People find meaning in spirituality or religion. They find meaning in their career. They see their career as a calling. They get meaning from that.
Mhm.
Um, Talk a little bit about meaning, the different ways that people seek out meaning, or where they should look for meaning, and what meaning can do for someone in the long term.
When I was writing the chapter on religion and spirituality, I thought a lot about this. And I think if you had to boil down meaning, and if you were to recommend to people of all walks of life, various cultures, to go find it, I would say this. You're going to find your meaning in being of use to some other human being on this planet. Or if it's not a human being, to some facet of this planet that sustains life. Something about the environment, for instance, your community, institutions. But you have to have this focus on being of use and leaving something better for other people, either directly, that is, serving another human being, or in the fabric of life through institutions or our environment that leaves something that helps other human beings. There's something about being useful to the world and finding a way to do that that creates meaning. It
I like
really,
how it all connects to that social piece, right? These aren't
Mhm.
independent ideas. Social connection gives you happiness. You hang out with your friends, but
Yeah.
if you have family, it gives you meaning and purpose. And so I think we take for granted just how rich our lives become when we. What I like to say is, most people, they have this spotlight of their attention, and if you have a childhood or early experiences that that aren't optimal for your development, that flashlight is pointed right back at you all the time. What am I thinking? Is this okay? Am I doing this right? And that when you take that flashlight and you can get to a place where you shine it on others, and you clearly, brightly on others, and you have no concern about what's behind the flashlight, that's when you start to like have unlock, as you might say, unlock these emotions.
You suddenly become the person you always knew could be, because that ego, that filter is not so front and center. And that's the amazing thing about spiritual and religious practices, why they're so beneficial. And when they're done right, they're really trying to get that filter to stop shining the light on you and take the flashlight that you hold that's amazing and shine it out there on the world where you can leave it a little better than what you found it. I just think that that's just a magical way when you see that happen in people. Oh, they just light up. And that's why I love the quote that was attributed to the late Pope Francis when he said, "Nothing in nature lives for itself. The trees do not bask in its own shade. The rivers do not drink their own water. Human beings can live for themselves. And yes, it's good for us to be happy. But you know what's even better? Is when someone else is happy because of you." We know that in our hearts. And when we experience it, that's hard. That's a hard thing to forget, because you now suddenly realize, when I put the flashlight on somebody else's happiness and they're happy because of me, just being me, wow, that's a win-win.
Well, we are out of time. Thank you so much for being on today. Hopefully the listeners can take away 1 to 2 things or pieces of information that inspire them to change their lives for the better, to focus on that sustainable happiness or long-term well-being. Thank you so much for being on today, Corey Keyes.
Thank you.
For more on Corey's work, pick up a copy of Languishing: How to Feel Alive Again in a World That Wears Us Down, wherever books are sold. If you enjoy this podcast, please share an episode with 2 of your friends. Head over to patreon.com/whydowethatpodcast to become a paid supporter of the show. You'll gain early access to episodes as well as bonus video content. Follow on Instagram or Facebook at Why Do We Do That Podcast, or on X at WDWDT Pod. Until next time, this is Dr. Ryan Moyer, hoping you found some answers to the question, why do we do that?